Have you ever considered that the most vulnerable state of your existence might be the one you enter every night without protection? We spend a third of our lives asleep, our consciousness drifting between worlds. Yet, we've forgotten the ancient wisdom of securing our energetic boundaries before this nightly journey. What if I told you that Jesus, not the sanitized figure from Sunday school, but the profound mystic and spiritual teacher, provided a specific technique to seal your aura before sleep? A practice so powerful yet so simple that it was deliberately obscured from mainstream teachings because it grants too much sovereignty to the individual seeker. The veil between the seen and unseen thins when we sleep. Our energetic body, our aura, becomes permeable, open to influences both benevolent and malevolent. In this suspended state between worlds, we are at our most receptive, but also at our most vulnerable. The masters of antiquity understood this profound truth, yet modern spirituality has largely abandoned these protective practices, leaving us exposed in ways our ancestors would find unthinkable. What if this oversight is not accidental, but part of a greater design to keep humanity energetically compromised? Jesus spoke of this reality in parables and metaphors, knowing that direct transmission of such knowledge would be suppressed by the powers of his time. Tonight, I invite you to reclaim this forgotten teaching, a spiritual technology that has been hiding in plain sight for 2 millennia. In the hidden archives of early Christian mysticism, preserved by those who walked a different path than institutional religion, lies a treasure of esoteric knowledge about the human energy field. The Nag Hammadi Library, discovered in 1945, revealed texts that had been suppressed for centuries, teachings that portrayed Jesus not merely as a savior, but as a master of spiritual science who understood the mechanics of consciousness and energy. Among these, recovered writings, particularly in certain passages of the Gospel of Philip and fragments of the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, we find allusions to practices involving what we now call the aura, the electromagnetic field that surrounds and interpenetrates the physical body. These texts speak of sealing the chambers and closing the gates before entering the realm of sleep, suggesting a deliberate practice of energetic protection. The early Gnostic Christians, those who sought direct knowledge, gnosis, rather than blind faith, preserved these teachings in secret, passing them from teacher to student in unbroken lineages that survived despite persecution. They understood something profound, that Jesus taught not only moral precepts, but practical techniques for spiritual empowerment and protection. What's remarkable is how these ancient practices align perfectly with modern understanding of energy medicine and quantum physics. The recognition that we are not isolated biological entities, but complex fields of energy in constant interaction with the universe around us. If this resonates with the deeper knowing within you, I invite you to join our community of seekers. This channel exists as a sanctuary for those who sense there is more to spiritual life than what conventional teachings offer. Those who feel called to recover the esoteric dimensions of Jesus' teachings that have been systematically removed from public discourse. By subscribing, you are not merely following content, you are participating in the resurrection of sacred knowledge that belongs to humanity, not institutions. Every video we share is another piece of the puzzle, another step toward reconstructing the complete spiritual science that Jesus and other masters taught. Together, we are rebuilding what was intentionally dismantled, remembering what we were conditioned to forget. This is not just learning, it's remembering. To understand the significance of Jesus' aura protection technique, we must first comprehend how the ancients viewed human consciousness and its relationship to cosmic forces. In the cosmology of early Christianity, before it was reformed to serve imperial purposes, the universe was understood as a complex interplay of energetic realms. The archons, as described in Gnostic texts, were not merely mythological figures but representations of psychic forces that could influence human consciousness. These forces were particularly active during sleep states, when the rational mind relaxed its guard. The archons were said to feed on human fear and negative emotions, harvesting the energy generated by nightmares and disturbed sleep. Jesus, according to these suppressed traditions, recognized these entities not as demons in the simplistic sense, but as energetic parasites that thrived in the absence of conscious protection. His teachings about watching and praying took on a much more practical dimension when understood in this context. He was providing instructions for maintaining energetic sovereignty during vulnerable states. The concept of the aura itself appears throughout ancient wisdom traditions under different names. In Hebrew mysticism, it was connected to the Merkaba or light body. In Egyptian mystery schools, it was part of the understanding of the Ka and Ba. Jesus, educated in these esoteric traditions during his missing years, synthesized this knowledge into practical applications for spiritual protection. What makes this teaching particularly powerful is that Jesus framed it not as superstition, but as spiritual science, a systematic approach to working with the human energy field. He taught that consciousness itself is a form of light, and that this light could be directed through intention and specific practices to create a shield around the sleeper. The Gospel of Philip hints at this when it states, "Light and darkness, life and death, right and left, are brothers of one another. They are inseparable." For this reason, neither are the good good, nor the evil evil, nor is life life, nor death death. This cryptic passage suggests a sophisticated understanding of energy polarities and how they must be balanced and contained, especially during sleep when consciousness journeys between worlds. What's fascinating is how these ancient understandings align with modern research into the electromagnetic properties of the human body and the documented effects of intention on energy fields. The science of bioelectromagnetics has now verified what Jesus and other masters taught millennia ago, that we are beings of energy as well as matter, and that this energy can be consciously directed. When we examine Jesus' teachings without the filter of later dogma, we discover a spiritual scientist who understood the mechanics of consciousness at a level we are only beginning to rediscover. The technique Jesus taught for sealing the aura before sleep represents a profound shift in how we understand the relationship between consciousness and energy. Rather than viewing spiritual protection as something granted externally by divine favor, Jesus empowered his followers with a practice they could implement themselves, a radical departure from priest-dependent religious systems. At its core, this practice recognizes that consciousness is not contained within the brain, but extends beyond the physical body as a field of intelligent energy. Modern science calls this the biofield. Ancient wisdom traditions named it the aura, the light body, or the Merkaba. Whatever the terminology, the principle remains. This field can be influenced by directed thought and visualization. The technique itself, stripped of later religious overlays, is elegant in its simplicity, yet powerful in its effects. It begins with the recognition that the human energy field is semi-permeable. Necessarily so, as we must interact with our environment. However, during sleep, when conscious control is diminished, this permeability can leave us vulnerable to energetic intrusions or leakage. Jesus taught his disciples to use what we might now call directed intention combined with visualization to create a temporary seal around this field before entering sleep states. The practice involves imagining divine light, what he called the light of the Father, surrounding your entire being in a perfect sphere or egg-shaped field. This is not mere fantasy, but the active direction of subtle energy through focused consciousness. What makes this approach unique is that Jesus didn't frame it as protection from demons or evil spirits in the simplistic sense that later Christianity would adopt. Instead, he presented it as a practice of energetic sovereignty, maintaining the integrity of one's consciousness during vulnerable states. The words he suggested using, preserved in fragments and oral traditions, translate roughly to "I seal myself in the perfect light of Christ's consciousness, impenetrable to all but the highest good." The Aramaic original carried connotations of creating a selective membrane rather than an absolute barrier, allowing beneficial influences while screening out disruptive ones. This understanding reflects a sophisticated grasp of energy dynamics that transcends the good versus evil dualism that later religious interpretations would impose. Jesus recognized that the universe operates through complex interactions of force and consciousness, and that personal sovereignty requires active participation rather than passive faith. When practiced consistently, this technique creates what modern energy workers would call a programmed field, an energetic pattern that maintains itself even as conscious attention shifts during sleep. The result is not just protection, but enhanced dream clarity, improved sleep quality, and a greater sense of psychological integration upon waking. If this teaching speaks to something you've intuitively sensed, that your consciousness extends beyond your physical form and requires mindful stewardship, I invite you to acknowledge this recognition. The simple act of pressing the like button becomes a modern gesture of what ancient traditions called bearing witness to truth when it appears. Each acknowledgement strengthens the field of remembrance we're collectively creating, a network of awakened consciousness that makes these forgotten teachings more accessible to others who are searching. This isn't about algorithms or popularity. It's about creating energetic pathways for wisdom to flow back into human awareness after centuries of suppression. Your recognition matters. It creates ripples in the collective field that help others find their way to these empowering truths. Consider how often you've awakened feeling inexplicably drained, despite getting adequate sleep. Or perhaps you've experienced disturbing dreams that left you feeling emotionally depleted or anxious throughout the following day. These experiences, which modern medicine might dismiss as stress or sleep disorders, were understood by ancient wisdom traditions as symptoms of energetic interference during vulnerable sleep states. You live in a world saturated with electromagnetic fields, psychic noise, and the projections of billions of minds. Your nervous system processes far more information than your conscious mind acknowledges. During waking hours, your psychological boundaries, what some traditions call the ego structure, filter much of this input, but in sleep, these boundaries naturally soften, creating both opportunity and vulnerability. Have you noticed how problems that seemed insurmountable often resolve themselves after a good night's sleep? This is because sleep allows your consciousness to access broader fields of information and healing. Yet, this same openness that facilitates healing and insight also creates exposure to less beneficial influences. Think of how carefully you lock your doors before going to bed, securing your physical space against intrusion. Yet most people leave their energetic field, which directly impacts their thoughts, emotions, and vitality, completely unprotected during the same period. This oversight reflects how thoroughly modern culture has disconnected from the wisdom of energy management that Jesus and other spiritual masters taught. The technique of sealing your aura before sleep isn't about paranoia or fear. It's about responsible stewardship of your most precious resource, your consciousness. Just as you wouldn't leave your home wide open while sleeping, energetic boundaries represent basic spiritual hygiene in a complex and not always benevolent energetic environment. What's particularly valuable about Jesus' approach is that it empowers rather than disempowers. Unlike religious systems that make you dependent on external authority for protection, this practice places the tools directly in your hands. It acknowledges your inherent ability to direct energy through focused intention, a birthright of being human that institutional religions often obscure or deny. When you begin implementing this practice, you may notice subtle but significant changes. More restful sleep, increased dream recall, fewer emotional hangovers from sleep states, and a greater sense of energetic integrity throughout your day. Many practitioners report a diminishment of the vague anxiety that seems to permeate modern life, what some spiritual teachers call energetic static. This isn't mystical thinking, but practical energy management. Just as you wouldn't expect your smartphone to function well with a depleted battery, your consciousness requires proper energetic maintenance to operate at its potential. Jesus understood this fundamental principle and offered practical techniques rather than just philosophical concepts. The beauty of this teaching is how it bridges ancient wisdom and modern understanding, showing that what Jesus taught about consciousness and energy was not supernatural but natural, aligned with the actual mechanics of how human awareness functions in relation to the broader fields of energy that constitute our universe. When we integrate the mythic dimensions of Jesus' teaching with its practical applications, we discover a comprehensive system for spiritual development that was hidden in plain sight. The technique for sealing the aura represents just one facet of a complete approach to consciousness management that balances protection with expansion, boundaries with connection. The light that Jesus spoke of, the light of the world, was never meant to be understood as merely metaphorical. He was describing the actual luminous nature of consciousness itself, which modern instruments can now detect as measurable electromagnetic fields around the body. When he said, "You are the light of the world," he wasn't speaking poetically, but literally, recognizing the radiant nature of human consciousness when it functions at its optimal capacity. This protection technique works because it engages the fundamental creative power of consciousness, the ability to direct energy through focused intention. By visualizing divine light surrounding your being before sleep, you're not engaging in fantasy, but actively programming your biofield to maintain its integrity during vulnerable states. The words or prayers that accompany this visualization serve as coding instructions for the field, establishing parameters for what energies may or may not interact with your system during sleep. What makes this practice particularly powerful is its foundation in love rather than fear. Unlike protection rituals based on warding off evil, Jesus' approach focuses on affirming the inherent light nature of consciousness itself. The distinction is subtle but crucial. Fear-based protection creates walls, while love-based protection creates intelligent membranes that remain selectively permeable to beneficial influences. This understanding transforms how we approach spiritual protection altogether. Rather than seeing ourselves as vulnerable beings in a hostile universe needing defense, we recognize ourselves as sovereign expressions of divine consciousness, establishing healthy boundaries in a complex energetic ecosystem. The shift is from victimhood to empowered participation. The technique itself becomes a form of prayer, not supplication to an external deity, but communion with the divine light that constitutes your essential nature. This is what Jesus meant when he spoke of the kingdom of heaven within you. The recognition that divine consciousness is not separate from your own, but is its very foundation. When practiced consistently, this simple technique creates a feedback loop of increasing awareness. As your sleep becomes more protected and regenerative, your waking consciousness becomes clearer and more perceptive, which in turn enhances your ability to maintain energetic sovereignty in all states. It's a virtuous cycle of spiritual development that Jesus understood and taught to those ready to receive such knowledge. Perhaps the most profound aspect of this teaching is how it restores our understanding of Jesus as a spiritual scientist rather than merely a moral teacher or sacrificial figure. He provided practical techniques for working with the actual mechanics of consciousness, techniques that demonstrate a sophisticated understanding of energy dynamics that science is only now beginning to verify. Have you ever wondered why so many of Jesus' most empowering teachings were systematically removed from mainstream Christianity? Perhaps because spiritual sovereignty, the ability to manage your own energetic field without institutional mediation, represents a form of freedom that hierarchical systems find threatening. By reclaiming these practices, you're not just improving your sleep, but participating in the restoration of the humanity's spiritual inheritance. As we conclude our exploration of this powerful technique, let's return to our initial question with new understanding. The vulnerability we experience during sleep isn't an inevitable condition, but a forgotten aspect of consciousness management. Jesus didn't come to make us dependent on external salvation, but to remind us of our inherent capacity for spiritual sovereignty through practical knowledge. What was once hidden has now been revealed, not as esoteric knowledge for the few, but as practical wisdom for anyone willing to implement it. The technique for sealing your aura before sleep stands as testament to Jesus' role as a teacher of consciousness, not just morality. It reminds us that spirituality at its core is not about belief, but about practical engagement with the energetic nature of reality. Perhaps the greatest paradox is that this protection doesn't separate us from the universe, but actually enhances our conscious participation in it. By maintaining the integrity of our personal field, we become more effective channels for divine light in the world, exactly as Jesus intended for his followers. True protection doesn't isolate, it empowers right relationship. The light you secure around yourself before sleep is the same light that illuminates your path during waking hours. The light of conscious awareness that is your birthright and true nature. In protecting it, you honor the divine spark within that connects you to all creation, while maintaining your unique expression of that universal consciousness. Tonight, as you prepare for sleep, remember this ancient practice. Visualize the pure light of divine consciousness surrounding your entire being in a perfect sphere. Feel its warmth, its protection, its intelligent presence. Speak words of intention, whether Jesus' original Aramaic phrases or your own heartfelt declaration of sovereignty. Then rest in the knowledge that you sleep not as an unguarded house, but as a sacred temple, maintained in perfect balance between connection and protection. The wisdom of ages awaits your practical application. The technique is simple, but its effects are profound. The choice to implement it is yours. A small act of spiritual sovereignty that honors what Jesus actually taught about human potential and divine embodiment. I'm curious about your experience with energetic protection during sleep. Has this teaching illuminated something you've intuitively sensed but couldn't quite articulate? Share the word "seared" in the comments if you intend to try this practice tonight. Let it be a declaration of your commitment to reclaiming this aspect of Jesus' practical spiritual teachings. Your journey toward energetic sovereignty matters, and your experience may help others rediscover this essential practice.